Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and returning to the podcast is Grace G. Sun Kim, author of a brand new book, Invisible. I'm super pumped to have you here. There it is. There it is for all
there
you
it is.
who are seeing the video. But you can see a picture of it by using whatever device you're listening to this on. If you just type in Invisible and book, it'll pop up. So now this past week, I finished reading it, was taking notes. And I want to know if you feel as good about this book as you should, because I think I'm a member of your fan club. I've read a bunch of your books. We've talked a lot, and I feel like this book does three different things that bring together like different voices that you have and ideas. One, it uses storytelling, like your own storytelling, and the Asian American experience and its history as a site for doing theological reflection. It also weaves together a number of different concepts from your work on the Holy Spirit, your reflection on intersectionality. It brings these different academic interests together, but then it does so in a real constructive, doing a real constructive theology of visibility at the end. And like when I finished it, I was like, oh, junk, this was like hitting Yahtzee. Like you brought together so many different things I love about you in one book. So I wanted to say this at the beginning, that if this interview sucks, it's my fault, because the book's amazing and you should go get it.
Oh, thank you, Trip. You're such an amazing host. And because you make podcast hosting so simple, I thought, when I started Madang, it'd be simple and it's the hardest thing. But you are amazing, Trip. And thank you so much for having me again. You don't need to always invite me, but I'm so excited. And your analysis of the book is so correct. I first began, I said, I just want to tell my story. And then when Fortress saw it, they said, oh, it has to be a little bit more academic. So then I started weaving all that in. And then I thought it's not like at the end, it just kind of hung there. And I had to do really deep thinking about how I'm going to end it. And that's when I came up with the Theology of Visibility. So I feel like, and actually this is my 20th book. And I think it came out on the 20th kind of anniversary of my PhD graduation. So it came out last year, I think December, and I graduated in December in 2001. So it was almost exactly 20 years. And I feel like I'm not into all these numbers, but sometimes it all aligns. And I thought this is such a thrill, because I felt like I was working, all the other books was kind of working towards this invisible. So I'm really happy with it. I'm happy, when I was doing the copy editing Trip, I was really scared because I was rereading my stories and I thought, oh no, I don't know if I should keep those stories. And, so personal stories, family stories, and, personal theological, like different, like ordination. And then I thought, if I take these out, it's going to be a point of no return. Like, I mean, there's gonna be nothing left in the book. So it's like a point of no return. And I just kept it. And I was really worried. But now that it's out, it's okay. I know people have started reading it. But people have been sending me comments and emails that they really appreciated the story. And I'm hoping that it doesn't just resonate with Asian Americans. I hope that everyone, and how you kind of said it at the beginning in the introduction, that people will enter the book understanding my story and being part of the story, and understanding how we can then work together and work towards getting rid of racism and discrimination and xenophobia and sexism. And so I just appreciate this time to share this book with you, Trip. So thank you for inviting me again.
Definitely enjoy getting to talk to you. And I wonder if a place to begin might be for you to share you becoming conscious of invisibility, because I think part of the power of the text in setting your own story as a immigrant who then spends time in Canada and in America, in a Korean religious context, and then through in the academy and all this kind of things. It's like there are these stories and breakthroughs where then the problem of invisibility comes to the fore. And as a theologian and as a Christian, right, like when we see problems, then we're like, oh, it's time to do some like reflecting and thinking. So like in your own story, when you were going back through it, when did invisibility get named as a site for theological reflection?
Yes, that's such a good question. I struggled with racism and sexism throughout my life, and you'll see this not only in this book, but my blogs and my previous books. It was an internal struggle where I am so depressed and down, you can't do anything about it. That's how sexism and racism affects people, where you feel kind of worthless. There's something wrong with you, and you can't get over it. Um, for the concept of invisibility or invisible, it's been around. Asian Americans, Asian North Americans have identified and talked about it for a long time. So it's not a new concept for me to come and bring into this book, but to bring it into the theological realm, then that would be a new thing. But many of us, even in social media, you might Google, and our experience here as immigrants or children of immigrants, or just as Asian Americans, we've been made invisible in so many ways. So it is a common experience that we all identify with. It's a common kind of, like, I can just talk to a stranger and they will say, yes, we feel invisible here in North America. So it's a very, very common thing. But to kind of tie it in with the theological, because it was so common, and I've been struggling with it for the last 20 years of my life, or even just before my PhD graduation, this concept of invisibility I've been struggling with. But in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, I thought I should think about it theologically. And then that's the product of this book. And I was able to do that because there are these concepts of invisibility even within scripture, of the lepers or of women, the Samaritan woman, where they are made invisible in society. And somehow Jesus brings them out of this invisibility. So, I bring in a lot of Asian concepts and traditions in my book. And I know some people, like maybe they're very conservative, they get really upset about it and they think I'm not doing theology. And I always have to remind people, this is theology, and white European men have been doing it for the last 2,000 years. But because it's been so normalized and that is theology, nobody questions it. Like, I think a big example will be Anselm's theory of atonement. He brings in this, feudal lords and all these concepts from his own lifetime. And people just think that's just normative, but that's not normative. But people have normalized it. So me bringing in these traditions, I think, and concepts from Korea and in Asia, it just helps us because we are, the only tool we have as theologians are words. And so the English language is limited, and that's the language that you and I converse in, and North Americans. So we need, concepts from Africa, from South America, from Asia to help us to widen our understanding of this infinite God. So I hope the readers will appreciate the some concepts I've already introduced, but there are newer ones that I bring in. So I hope people will appreciate it and that they will be able to use it in their own life. And if they themselves are feeling invisible, it's not limited to Asian Americans. Those who may be disabled or those with different sexuality or gender identification also feel invisible, that this book will be very helpful for them, because we're all struggling. We're all on this journey, and many of us struggle.
Yeah. And one of the things that, I don't know, raised the theological stakes is the way you outlined different parts of the Asian American experience, like the history of it. Like things that, I may have come up in a class when I took American history, but like we knew internment camps and that kind of thing. But thinking of just like in 1850, you mentioned that there's attacks on foreign miners, right? Because of wanting to shorthand, right? Like the access to labor, forcing it to a different place. That there was a law in 1854 that Chinese can't testify in a court against white Americans. And then, the kind of, then you have like a whole block of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And there's this huge history that is a different kind of history because it's an immigrant's history than the normal way race gets framed in America, black and white kind of framing. That's not the story of at least chosen immigrants. It's a story of slaves, slave trade, and kind of stealing and forcing. So that history, I think, became really helpful for people whose normal framing and the normal story you tell yourself historically is based on slave trade and kind of the cultural dominant expression of black versus white.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. My three kids all started kindergarten here in the US. They were born in Canada, but none of them were taught any of this Asian American history, immigrant history. I just saw recently that there's a school board in New Jersey that are going to implement Asian American history in their school curriculum. So I don't think there aren't many schools that teach it. And this is a huge problem because if we don't know our history, we're going to repeat ourselves. And, we just think this Asian hate, anti-Asian hate during this pandemic is new. It's not new. It has happened before. Every time there is a pandemic, every time there is something that is wrong with society, they've blamed Asian Americans. They've taken our jobs. They're bringing the flu or the virus or whatever disease. We have been blamed because it is easy to target us. And in that way, we are made invisible. People don't know our history. People don't know what we have gone through, all these laws that prevented them from us from testifying, from us from voting. When we think about voting rights, always on the top of our head, it's always the African Americans, because we had big civil rights leaders leading that act. But we fail to recognize that Asian Americans were not considered citizens. We've been here for hundreds of years. The big influx came in the 1800s, but still they were here before that. And no Asian Americans were allowed to vote until 1943. That is so recent in our recent history that we weren't allowed to vote. And not every Asian Americans were allowed to vote. Slowly they were integrated. Japanese, I think, were 1946, and then Indians. And then, eventually every Asian American were allowed to vote, but it wasn't automatic because we weren't considered citizens. We couldn't buy property. And all these laws were put into place to prevent us from being a citizen in America. And so we were made invisible by the law, from politics and religion, culturally. So, it was very painful for me to write this and then for me to share my story, but I thought it was necessary. Some people say, oh, when you do theology, you shouldn't be sharing your story. That's so non-academic, but that is what feminist theologians have been doing. With the rise of feminist theology in 1960s, we have been sharing our story. But when you look back for 2000 years, every male theologian shared their story in some way or another too. So we come to understand God. We come, to encounter God through our own experiences. And we see that God has been present, that God is with us. So, I think really hearing different voices, and I really appreciate Homebrew Christianity because you provide platform for so many women, for people of color, and you are doing God's work, Trip. So thank you so much. Thank you again for all these questions.
Oh, so how would you put it this way? What was a story you went back and forth on sharing? Because
in the book?
Yeah. I was wondering, because I knew you had mentioned before when you were working on it, trying to decide, in some sense, like the writer's always deciding how much blood they're pouring into the page.
I think the ones that really I struggled with was my personal family story, my grandmother, my grandfather's story. that is so hard to share because in Asian culture, it's honor shame. So you don't, you don't put your dirty laundry out there for people to see. But I felt I've been writing that part for years already because I just thought if I don't ever publish it, I want my kids to know, their family history. So it's in I have all these stories in my laptop because, recently I write for Spirituality and Health magazine. And my latest piece for that magazine was, I think, the spiritual practice of writing. So I always kept a journal from when I was a little kid since I started writing. So I've got like these books of journals. I hid them away in my closet, and one day my daughter found them. I think she might have read them all. I don't know. But I made my kids write journals all the time. And then, when they grow up, if they stop, they stop. I can't force my kids to do anything. But the only child that has continued is my daughter, which I'm so grateful for. So she carries her journal around everywhere and she writes almost daily. For me, I stopped writing the journal, but I write it in my laptop. So I've got all these like documents of reflections. And so I wrote those stories to, because I was debating whether to share them or not. But that one, at the end, I decided to include it because it really shows the sexism and the patriarchal culture that Asians are steeped in, and we need to fight this culture. So I felt that, I struggled with it so much, and I included that in. And I think there's
Would
three
you,
big,
sorry, I was going to say, I think it would be nice to share a bit of it for those that don't know,
oh,
that haven't read it, because we're trying to get them to go read the book. And
yeah, so they should read it because I think I write it better than I share. But it is to do with abuse in the family, and now looking back, I don't know how much I shared, so I don't want to share too much of, because the story is so big, and it's a story that my dad tells me all the time, and I don't think he tells me intentionally so that I can write about it, and he will not know that I wrote about it. So I can't remember how much of the story I told. So I think people should read that story. Yeah.
when I was reading, I had the experience of going to parts of my own story that I don't have exposed when Tripp is functioning as theologian, like in his head. You know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
you go into the mode of thinking theologically,
Yeah.
so often we abstract ourselves from our situation, our
Yeah.
experiences, our
Yeah. Oh,
history, our
yeah. Oh,
story.
yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
one of the things that struck me so much about your vulnerability, is that it made me bring to mind, like, what are the stories I'm carrying and inheriting, and then what do I do with them? And I think
Yeah.
that's a question that you ask powerfully in the book, and it's one that the church today is asking with a kind of intensity it hasn't before, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
between like you talk about the rise, right, of hate after COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
You see the same kind of question showing up around our inheritance, the story around battles around the monuments for different figures in American history, or the Black Lives Matter movement pressing things, and this kind of thing. It leads us to have to include in our articulation of the faith, of the gospel, of good news, these stories and experiences that so often we set aside and kept in the closet. And
Yeah.
that to me is a real theological task that
Yeah.
requires the kind of visibility, right, that
Yeah.
that you're advocating.
Yeah. So, one of the books I'm struggling to write is A Theology of Vulnerability. I've been thinking about it for so long, and I've written like little blogs and pieces for different places. But I think, it's this vulnerability that we need to come to so that people will recognize that nobody's life is rosy and easy. One of like online social media can be cruel, and and I delete comments too, but people will say, oh, what's wrong with your life? You got 3 great kids and you have a job, what's wrong with you? People do that. And I think that's so cruel because, people don't know what your daily life is. They may know from what you post. And of course, people are going to post nice things or beautiful pictures. Nobody wants to post a picture where you just woke up and you have a mop head. And so people can be cruel, but I think, that's a more physical thing. But I think this, we go through so much pain and our bodies experience so many things. So I think being vulnerable and sharing. So I was really vulnerable when I wrote this. And as I shared earlier about the copy editing, because, there's a big gap between when you submit and when you get the copy editing files. And then you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wrote this. Am I going to include it? And you have this whole wrestling match in your head. What am I going to do? And then when you start counting the pages of all the stories that you want to delete, there's nothing left in your book. So, but at the end, when I included them, I thought, this is the thing that I've been struggling with, the vulnerability, a theology of vulnerability. And I think it may help those who are having deep struggles in their life, that they are not alone, that all of us have these struggles and we need to be vulnerable and share our weaknesses, because I don't appreciate the comments of your life is so great, what are you complaining about, or why are you writing this theology again? But it's not. We are dealing with racism and sexism, xenophobia, which is so embedded in our culture, and we experience it all the time. And even those comments itself are part of the systemic problem. They should, white men should not be making such comments to me. They have not walked the walk that I have walked, and, the experiences of racism during my childhood is very traumatic. I still experience, bodily what I've gone through. It was so horrible. In the 1970s, and growing up in the small little town in London, people in those small towns, especially in Canada, where people weren't aware of the Korean War as much as maybe American kids. I don't know even know if American kids were more, but when people don't know that and they just keep calling you names and telling you there's no such thing as Koreans, it adds up, and it has effects on you. So that story with the family, the other story with my in-laws, I was debating about. And then the third story was about my ordination story. I didn't name the people, but those were 3 stories. And I thought the ordination story I've shared publicly in lectures, and I thought, okay, it's out there anyway, so I'll just include it. But the family ones, I really never shared it in public. So it's kind of like the first time where it's out there. But a few years ago, I wrote a piece on sexual assault within the Asian American community for Sojourners magazine. And Asian Americans don't want to talk about it too much because it is an honor shame society and immigrants are in the same boat. And we don't want to share any shame that we have experienced personally or within the family or even within our community, because it really puts shame. But I wrote that little piece, and Connie Chung, the news anchor, many people who are younger may not know Connie Chung. She was one of the first Asian American women to be on anchoring. And I remember when I was growing up, my mother, she didn't know the English language. She couldn't speak English very well, but she would just have her on TV in the background. And so I grew up with Connie Chung in the background all the time. And so I really loved her. She was a beautiful woman. She was so articulate. She was so good on TV. But out of the blue, she emailed me and really thanked me for that piece. And I was so grateful for that because I love getting responses out of, for my pieces, but from Connie Chung, who I really adored and, my mother loved, she reached out. So that was so helpful because she's saying Asian Americans need to keep writing about it. We live in this honor shame, but we need to kind of share and help one another, because my piece helped her. But she wrote a piece before I wrote a piece. And, we need more Asian Americans to share these stories.
And you talk about the way shame leads to a kind of silence around domestic and sexual abuse. And you also talk about a particular way patriarchy shows up in both the cultural inheritance and the way it expresses itself religiously. Maybe you want to say something about the way, like, that the shame context has a unique relationship with patriarchy, that kind of, I don't know, makes the kind of the power of invisibility weightier.
Yeah. So patriarchy, it's been there forever in the Asian culture, and it's there to protect the male family, the male lineage. So you don't want anything to destroy the family image. And much of the assault, physical abuse are done by the male family members or a male friend. So honor shame really prevents us exposing the male members or male friends who have raped or assaulted or physically abused the woman in the family. So it goes hand in hand. And so in the book, I don't really like the subtitle, but that's the one that Fortress came up with. I had some other subtitle because I really want, the subtitle right now is Theology and Experience of Asian American Women, but I really wanted a subtitle to bring people that it's not just a book for Asian Americans or Asian women, Asian American women. It's for all people, because they enter the book and they can identify and see either where they have caused some of this or also are experiencing this, and how can we work towards this theology of visibility where everyone is welcome. So this invisibility is twofold. It happens within the Asian American community, where this patriarchy and this honor shame makes particularly Asian American women invisible, because we are placed as subordinate. We are not to share our experiences of shame that has happened in our family, and the assault, a lot of us women carry these things in our bodies because we've been assaulted verbally, physically, sexually, in so many different ways throughout our lifetime. And this honor shame prevents us from sharing. And so we are made invisible in that community, and then in this wider North American community. So it's a twofold. And in the wider community, because as you mentioned, Trip, at the beginning, racism is always talked about in Black and white terms. So anyone that falls in between, Native Americans, Hispanic, Asian Americans, we are constantly told, and out of the particularly Asian Americans, that it isn't racism, because we are considered honorific whites. We are the model minority. And I think recently, I don't know when you're going to post this, but, with on The View, what is her name that spoke about Holocaust, and that was
Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg. Yeah, she's now suspended, but I think it almost warrants being fired. I think if it was anybody else, they might have been fired for comments like that, saying it had nothing to do with racism because the Jewish people are white. That's what I didn't see the argument, but I read the argument. And that just falls right into this Black and white binary, this Black and white discussion of racism. And it's not, and it can't be that. But because it does, American society particularly does that, then our experiences, especially Asian American experiences of racism, are saying, that wasn't racism. I don't know how many times people have told me that was not racism every time I share my stories of racism, because we're not Black. And so that whole dichotomy needs to go away, because, and Whoopi Goldberg, for some reason, fell into that. And I hope she realizes what she has done. She has apologized, but who knows if she totally understands. We got to get rid of that, because it really feeds into this invisibility of Asian Americans. We are 6% of the population. Blacks are about 13%. But, because we are a smaller group, and because, people keep feeding into the model minority, you guys are all wealthy, you guys are all doing well, you guys all go to the top schools, but look at the statistics, we're not all rich. People are living in poverty, and Asian Americans are living in poverty. We're not going to the top schools. We're not all doing well. And this model minority myth, what it does is it pits us against the other people of color. And it just does disservice, because what white society keeps saying is, oh, just look at the Asian Americans. If you work just as hard, Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, you have nothing to complain about, because if you just work as hard as Asian Americans, you'll be doing well. So we've got to stop this model minority myth, this honorific whites. We are not whites. So, and if you keep calling us honorific whites, it keeps saying that the white people are the best. This white supremacy, white superiority. We gotta, there's so many things that we need to dismantle. And in theology, we need to do it too, because Christianity itself is doing so much damage to people of color, to women, to those who are marginalized because of their gender identity, their sexual identity, sexual orientation. It just, there's so much work that needs to be done in theology, in Christianity. And so, my book is just a small part of this task, to dismantle so many isms that are there to cause trauma, to cause pain and suffering. So, I hope people, and as I said, it's not a book for Asian Americans, but I hope it's a book that people can enter in, and how can we work together to stop these problems in our society and in our churches.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk about the concept of power. It shows up in the chapter on immigration, and in racism, and in sexism, the way those particular kind of dynamics play out in perverse forms of power. When you and thinking back to the previous conversation when you and Susan were here, and we talked about intersectionality, power becomes a way of thinking about all the dynamics at play in any kind of analysis or critical reflection on a situation. As a theologian, are there certain criticisms or suspicions we should have towards power in general to start thinking about it, so that it doesn't generate habits and patterns of making bearers of the divine image invisible?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Susan and I had such a great time with you, Trip. And I know you had Susan on for a different occasion too. Susan is just this wonderful human being and wonderful friend. And that book, Intersectional Theology by Fortress, is doing so well. And I never expected it to do well. We were wondering, what should we write about? And we both suddenly thought about intersectionality as a tool for theology. And I think it came out maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I don't remember now. And we are co-writing another book at this moment. So hopefully that will be out and you can have us back again. But since it's come out, I've used it in so many of my own writing, because my writing continues to build on this intersectional theology, where it really examines power and who holds power and what we need to do with this power, because this power makes people like us invisible. So, I've been thinking about power for a while, and how, the center and decentering, the center of this white male heteronormative within society, and also within the church too, and within theology. So everyone else, are always questioned. Black theology, is that really theology? Queer theology, is that really theology? All this in the margins, and they are pushed to the margins and feel powerless, because it's not thought of as real theology. It's something strange that people are doing and just being creative or just doing on the side. So this decentering of the margins, so that we have multiple centers. And then, so in a way, it's not just one center, but these multiple centers. And we are a part of this center, and that we are all equal, because how this intersectionality works is, we ourselves are multiple identities. Myself as an Asian American, able, educated woman, as a theologian, and able theologian, male, heterosexual, we have all these identities. But some of these identities are used to continue to marginalize and continue to make people powerless. So this concept of power is so important. How does it work out? How do we decenter this margin and share the power, so that people, especially Asian Americans that I'm focusing on, are not made powerless, but we are empowered. And I would like to say that about all the other people that are marginalized, because it's not just Asian Americans that are made powerless. There are other people.
Yeah. And I think you actually give this but like your kind of constructive account of a theology of visibility, and the way you bring together kind of 4 different concepts and then spell them out for you use the language of visibility of the kingdom of God, is I think are really helpful, because the concepts themselves are communitarian. In the normal Eurocentric patriarchal hierarchical vision of power is not something that's possessed between people. It's something you possess over people. And I was just struck in thinking about how in many ways the way you weave those concepts together are actually giving texture to a concept, kingdom, that so often has then just been appropriated against the very meaning Jesus gave it. I love dropping the G. I joke in my first book that if you take the G out of the kingdom of God and its kingdom, you get rid of patriarchy and hierarchy. But if you're talking to middle schoolers, it's the cock and the crown. Fortress edited that joke to phallus and the crown, which is real.
To what in the crown?
To phallus, because that's so much better, Grace. If you drop the G, and the joke of the book was Abba, the one Jesus calls Abba, says drop the G, because God's kingdom is one where patriarchy and hierarchy and domination systems don't function. And then I didn't know they had edited it till I read the book in print for the first time, and it said phallus and the crown. And I was like, oh,
that is so funny. I love your book. You're talking about the Homebrew Christianity book. Yeah. Oh, Jesus.
Like,
I know.
phallus.
I know. You know what? Trip, you've created a movement, right? And you were one of the first podcasters out there with Homebrew Christianity. And I think maybe my first podcast ever interview was with you on Homebrew Christianity. I didn't even know what a podcast was at that time. I'm like, what do you mean there's a podcast? So you are like a forerunner. You have just paved the way, and you made this podcasting so simple, as I said earlier, that I said, I'm going to start Madang, and I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and I didn't know how much time I was going to spend on it. But you make everything so easy, because you are this natural interviewer, and you make everything look so simple. But that whole series, Trip, I hope we can do. I think you were suggesting maybe a whole thing about getting all the authors together, but you created this movement. I think that Homebrew Christianity book series, and you wrote about Jesus Christ and I wrote about the Holy Spirit, we should do a whole thing together, because it is such a rich, it's like a small book series, but those small ones can be so powerful, because you have to get rid of all the excess stuff and just write the essential points. And I love every book of that series. So I think your podcast and that book series is just amazing. So thank you for doing that. And then now I can't remember what your question was, but anyway, I just wanted to say that. Oh yeah,
I think I take compliments. I take them. But in chapter 5 of the book, you pick out 4 different concepts. And if people hung out with you on the podcast before, read your books, like you regularly give continued texture to how like chi and the concept of spirit as a kind of cross tradition framing for the life of the divine. And then you reflect on Han, the Korean concept Han, and how it's this kind of unjust suffering that reshapes the individual and then distorts their relations with others, and it's a kind of burden you bear. But the sticky love,
Chung.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
sticky love. Come on, I was like, I'm totally going to use this in a sermon. Now I just need, and maybe you want to talk, kind of explore that, and then Uri, is that how you pronounce?
Udi. Yeah,
Uri.
Udi.
Okay,
Yeah.
Uri. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah, Udi. Yeah.
It's the redneck.
No. I think actually after
So
you
much.
said it, I thought maybe I should have written it in a different way, but I don't know if other people have phonetically like written it. But then actually the way you said it is probably the way that all English people would probably say it. So I thought maybe I should have wrote it a different way. But those concepts, because as I said at the beginning, when you were interviewing me, I was spilling out my guts and sharing, a lot of the history. And I thought maybe it's just too much history. Then I thought if I delete it, then people will think I'm just writing out of thin air. So I kept the history and I kept the personal stories. And then I thought it should end on a good note. And the book is called Invisible, and I thought maybe it should be called Theology of Visibility. But anyway, I think the shorter the title these days, the better it is. It's like one word or half a word is good for me now, because I can't remember my own book titles. So Invisible worked out, and I think maybe I suggested it too, but I really wanted people to know that I am introducing this theology of visibility, and I hope people will be able to use it, white people, Blacks, Hispanic, Native Americans, in their own life and then their own struggle, and church people, because I wrote it kind of simply too. I really wanted to write it for the public, but then I think Fortress made it a little bit academic, but I really wanted it for the public. So the 4 concepts of visibility, I was struggling, what should I include? What should I include? And I brought them all from the Asian traditions, and I've written about most of them, little bits and pieces in other books, but I really fleshed it out. So the concept of Han, I think many people are familiar with, because I'm not the only one. A lot of Asian American theologians have written about it. Andrew Sung Park, Chang Yang, it's because it's such a prevalent concept of this unjust suffering. So there are systems that are set up that cause unjust suffering. People suffer all the time. If I don't get my cup of coffee or your cup of tea, people may suffer. But that is just the suffering. But when it's unjust, when there is racism, the system that is set up and you're suffering, that is unjust suffering. When there is sexism in our society and you suffer, you're raped or you're abused sexually, then that is unjust suffering. And it carries this deep pain in your heart. And it can be an individual suffering or it can be communal. So in Korea, we experience communal, collective Han, because we have been invaded by China, by Japan, we have been colonized. And so that is a collective Han that we experience. So that is one concept. And that once we are able to name our suffering, then we can work towards this theology of visibility. Once we can say that, let's break down racism. People are saying, let's give up because we're never going to get rid of racism. I always live in hope, and we can work towards dismantling racism. We can work towards dismantling sexism, especially in our churches. We need to do this in our church. So I'm always living in hope. So I'm laying out the problem that we have. So the book, these stories, the personal stories, it's this Han that I carry. And people will use other terms like trauma, but it gets passed on through generations. It's in our bodies and it's in our psyche. It's part of us and it gets passed on. And we need to kind of unpack it and release this Han. And in my other works and other theologians, they will say, Christ helps us release this Han. So the other one, the Chung, sticky love, other theologians have written about it too, Anjo and I think Nami. So we've written about it, but this in Korea, we talk about Chung all the time. So I think in the Western world, we talk, there's love, but then there's, what are the loves that we have? Philios and
Oh yeah, the four loves, because C.S.
yeah.
Lewis told us about it.
Yeah.
Agape.
So those,
yeah,
agape. It's too early for me. Trip, you're there in the middle of the day. It's too early. Agape, and then what are the other ones?
Yeah, there's friendship, love.
Yeah.
Neighbor.
We all know those loves. Yeah,
we know them so much that we forgot them. But they're there somewhere.
They're there. So I think we need more words for love. It's like, Native Americans have so many words for these different terms, and like snow or ice, or we need as many terms because, words form our thoughts and our imagination. So the more words that we have, the better off we are as human beings, the better off we are. So that's what we need to learn and have second and third languages that we have. Europeans, some of them speak 5, 6 different languages. And I think the more languages that you speak, the better off you are, because some languages can't just be translated. But this Chong is a love where it is sticky, and it's this attachment love, and you can't get rid of it. So in Asia, like here, sometimes you read in the news, this child will divorce their parents or something, or the separation. In Asia, you can't do that because it doesn't matter. You're always connected. So, you have a teacher and you hate that teacher and you're out of that class and bye-bye, you never have to see them again. But in this Asian culture, they're forever your teacher. So there is this respect, or this Chung, this connectedness, this sticky love. So you may fight with your in-laws, but the sticky love brings you back together. You may fight with your spouse or your partner or your friend, and the sticky love, this Chung, brings us together. It's this connectedness. And, when Koreans love honey, and I love honey too. I drink, I may start with coffee and then I have tea. And then by the end of the day, I drink like honey water or honey tea. So I've got all these different drinks throughout the day. And so the sticky, you put your finger or you touch honey and you can't get rid of it. You put tissue on it to get rid of it, and it's like a whole mess, because then the tissue's all over your hands too. It's the stickiness, and you can't get rid of this. And so that's the kind of love that we're talking about. And, through our theological journey or our faith journey, sometimes we go through this darkness. And I know there is a term, I don't know, that I can't think of, but some of the spiritual thinkers have come up on the dark journey of the night.
Of the soul.
Yeah, dark night of the soul. That's what I was thinking of. So we may go through that, but I think if we are going through a hard, difficult time in our own walk, in our own Christian faith, or whatever spiritual journey that you are on, this Chung between us and God keeps us together. It's inseparable, and it's very scriptural. The love, nothing can separate us from the love of God. So this is this sticky Chung love. It's a different term to help us understand. And sometimes we have it towards material goods too, or, it's a term that we use a lot. So Korean listeners, they know exactly what I'm talking about. We say Chung opda. That means there's not enough Chung, and we got to share that Chung with you. And to bring this bond towards us. So that is there's Han, and there's Chung, and then there's Chi.
Can I ask you a question about that real quick before you go on? Because one of the elements of it that struck me when reading is that, part of what happens with invisibility is the kind of justifying of your separateness. Right. So part of what happens when you possess power over rather than power with and among, or what patriarchy, hierarchy, those kind of domination systems do, are tell a story where it's normal to be cut off from all those you are over. And in that, the stickiness is kind of like a entangled love, like where the community's entangled. And what happens in that is that you only know yourself in relation to, with, and for your neighbor. And that's a different sense of identity, because there, to be seen is also to see the other, and to be heard involves listening. And it's that it kind of entangled identity of relating as normative is really different, right? It's very kingdom and not kingdom.
Exactly.
And it gives a different context for understanding the unjust suffering of Han and what it means, right, for where the spirit dwells and chi and that kind of thing. I just thought that concept was like the well, this is a very southern thing, but if you're making homemade macaroni and cheese, you
I love
the butter and the flour, and you got a nice and the milk, you make a nice roux. You don't see it at all when you eat it, but if it's not done correctly, it's either too runny or it separates into part and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, so that was the image that came in Baptist preacher kid's head when reading it. I was like, oh, it's like the roux in homemade macaroni and cheese.
Yeah, I think you got it right. Yeah, you got it right there. So and it is, it's all, all these terms kind of go together with the intersectionality too. Intersectionality, because we know that we have these different identities. We don't want, I don't just experience racism, I also experience sexism. So recognizing these different powers of oppression is so important. So Chung is kind of bringing us together, that we are relating, we are relatable, and we need each other to survive. We are the sticky love that keeps us together. And I think that will be helpful when we're working to dismantle racism and sexism too, because we are part of this kingdom of God. God created all of us. And it's so fascinating that none of us are the same. None of us look the same. We are all different. And this difference is what makes this world so beautiful, and we need to appreciate. So this Chung kind of keeps us together. Now, so to go into Chi, I've written a lot about Chi. I have a whole book, The Holy Spirit, Chi and the Other. A new book came out in Europe. So you can get that book. It's out in Europe already. Spirit Life from DLT publisher. It's coming out in March in North America through Fortress, but it's part of a really short book series. After I did yours, it was so much work. I said, I'm never going to do a book series, but then I got they twisted my arm to do this book series called My Theology. And I think there's 16 books, or maybe less than that, I don't know. So mine is called Spirit Life. So I've written a lot on Chi, but for this book, I also included Chi is spirit in Asia. And so different languages have different words. In Germany, when theology was so big, was Geist. In the Old Testament, it's Ruha. In the New Testament, written in Greek, it's Pneuma. So different languages have different words for spirit. And I think bringing in the Asian concept of spirit, I think English speakers are already aware of, when we do Tai Chi or Reiki, that is, the word Chi is already in there. Or some Japanese and Koreans, we say Ki, Chinese say Chi. I thought there's more Chinese people in the world, so I just say Chi because more people speak Chinese and they are such a large population of the world. But this Chi is this spirit within us. And so it's this more embodied understanding of the spirit. You and I have Chi, and we share Chi, and we want to lift each other up. Some Christians will say, how is your soul today? Or, how is your spirit? Let's lift our spirits up. We want to lift each other's spirit up. We want to lift each other's Chi up, the spirit of God within us. So I thought that is so important in our work of visibility, that people experience difficulties, harm, trauma, and we want to lift each other up. The Spirit of God within all of us. Quakers say that of God in each of you. And so for me, this Chi that is within us, the Spirit of God within us, that the Spirit was poured on all of us, very biblical image. So I would just want to say this embodied sense, because somehow the spirit that we talk about in the last 2,000 years feels like a more philosophical understanding, more, it's not a tangible concept. But when we bring in as Chi, it sounds more tangible, and that really God is within us. So the fourth term is Uri, and Uri, I'm always fighting dualism, and so when we're talking about Uri, it is this community, and in Asia, community overrides individualism. Here in the Western world, everything is about individualism. I. If you don't write or say I, nobody knows who you're talking about in a sentence. In Asia, we rarely use the subject I. And we usually use Uri rather than I, even though it may be singular. For example, I'm married, and I will never say my husband. In the Western world, we always say my or I. It's very individualistic. Everything is centered around you, around yourself. And in many ways, Christianity has done that too. Everything is I, my salvation. You got to be saved, individual savior. And so when you're working with climate change and you're not thinking about just you, people have a hard time with that. But in the Asian world, where it's not I, so I never say my husband, I say our husband. We say 우리 남편, which is our husband. So we're not polygamous. Even though you have one husband, you still say our husband. And here we say my church or my school or my home. In Asia, we would say our home, our church, our school. It is a plural understanding. We say 우리 in all things. Even though you may be a single parent and you have one child, you don't say my child, you say our child. So I think, I won't be able to change the English language overnight, but I think bringing in that concept in our theological thinking, in our Christian discourse, really changes things and flips things around and makes us understand we are in this kingdom of God. There is a kinship. We need each other. We cannot kill each other off. We have caused enslavement here, genocide here, indentured workers here on American soil. We cannot continue this way. We need each other. We're all children of God. So this Uri concept really challenges our Christian notion of individualism, my salvation, everything, my Jesus, my God, and really flips it and has this our concept. And then that will help us in this theology of visibility, recognizing that we are brothers and sisters, we are this kinship, and lifting each other up out of this Han, recognizing each other's spirit, recognizing that we are all connected through this experience of Chung. I hope people will be challenged by the book. I hope, there will be Bible study groups in the church, that it will be used in seminaries, that individuals will be challenged to read it in their own study groups. It's a book for everybody. And I hope people, I'm bringing my own experience of Asian Americans, but we're not the only one made invisible. But it is a concept that we all identify with, just like that. Nobody has to explain it, Asian Americans, but really so many other members of our community, of our churches, of our society are made invisible. So I hope we can lift each other up, and recognize that we are all part of this kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I think you beautifully weave the four concepts together, and it really gives a different vision than so many Western Christians assume is the case about the kingdom. And one of the reasons I think it does that is, well, two things popped in my head. One is there's a lot of times that even in the teachings of Jesus, the word in Greek, it's plural, and it's like, properly y'all, and it gets translated you, and then it runs through, right, the cognitive interpretive framework of Western Christianity, and all of a sudden Jesus says, you are the light of the world, and it's like, oh, that's my job. Or you are the salt of the earth, and not y'all are. Or Paul says, let the same mind be in y'all, not you. And it's how does the community participate in its entangled relations, that the canonic mind, anyway, like that happens so many times just in what we've done to the text. And it's precisely the gift of these other concepts to reintroduce us to what is sitting there in the picture of Jesus and his teachings around the kingdom of God.
Yeah, I love your use of entanglement too. Yeah, we are, they say if someone coughs in China, we catch a cold. Everything that we do affects everybody. So our words affect each other, our actions affect each other, how we live every day affects everybody. So I think recognizing that there's this entanglement, this connectedness, we are all together, we are all in this body of Christ, I think will really motivate us to change the world. There's so many prophetic voices that have come to challenge the way we live. So I hope that everyone will be challenged, that we live differently, and that we will learn to love, have this Chung, and recognize the chi of each other, the chi within each other.
Yeah, I agree. And so I have one more question, and I'll answer it first so you have time to think about it. But if you were going to guest preach on the topic of invisible, what text are you going to pick? And I've started thinking about that when reading books. And now I've decided I'm just going to ask theologians that occasionally if one pops in my mind. And when I was reading it, the one that I thought would be tons of fun is when Jesus affirmations, for those who have eyes to see, let them see, and ears to hear, let them hear. Because that's always connected to, will they recognize the kingdom of God? And so often we hear that as like eyes to see, because what does it require? An intervention of something other from the outside, or ears to hear, right? Like being seized and grabbed and shook, and you may experience it, but the person next to you doesn't. But like a theology of visibility, the seeing and hearing of the kingdom is not something that breaks in from outside. It's a different way of relating to all the people that you live and are shaped and formed by.
Yeah, I would like that passage too. And then on the top of my head, I'm also thinking of the woman who anointed Jesus before the crucifixion. Yeah, I think, all the men were so mad, this woman, sinful woman, and she's breaking this jar. And then Jesus says, we will remember her. So somehow, during the time of patriarchy, this marginalized woman, and Jesus lifts her up, and we remember her story, her beautiful story. And Jesus says what she has done is so beautiful. So there's so many scriptural passages, but that's the one that came in the top of my head. And even maybe the Samaritan woman at the well. So many people are marginalized in our society. So many people are made invisible. This collective understanding within the Asian American community is very real, of us being made invisible, but so many other groups are. So we want to lift them up. They are in our churches, they are in our faith communities, they are in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces. We should lift each other up and recognize the beautifulness, the Spirit of God, the chi in them, and empower each other to do good in the world. So there's so many passages.
Oh yeah.
Thank you for asking me.
Well, I mean, you want them there. That way, those who are listening that might be thinking about having a theologian visit to guest preach now. After you have the book group around invisible, and you invite.
I would love a book group. Yeah. And I know some schools like Boston College, I think they're one of their groups are using my book as a reading group. And I'm so excited. I love it when people tell me that they're using my book, because then I feel like, okay, it was all worth all the stress and the crying and the pulling out hair for years. So I always find it so helpful when people do reach out to me, either on social media or by email, that they're reading it, because then it makes it all worth it. Because I don't know if in the introduction I do, or in the preface I do write about how my laptop crashed when I was writing the book. So it
had just crashed. Like we were recording for the Black Theology class like a year and a half ago or so, and you were trying to rewrite the book, and
it was horrible.
Those are no fun.
It's no fun. And you always hear other people's laptop crashing. My laptop is ESR and it's fairly new, about a year and a half. You would never think. That's why I never like put stuff outside, like on a hard drive. I just never thought it's never going to break. So, and it just like that. Now I store on like 2-3 external drives. I email myself like chapters all the time as I'm writing it, because I'm so paranoid that the laptop's gonna crash. Before, I never did this. I never emailed myself drafts of anything. Now I'm like super paranoid because they did not give me a new laptop. They just fixed it. Like I sent it to so many.
Trying to get it recovered.
So Apple just said return it. So they just put a new thing in there. So it's still old. Like, I don't know when this is going to crash again. So I'm paranoid all the time. Every morning I'm thinking, is this laptop going to work?
It is. It's pretty depressing when that happens.
You don't know how much I cried, Trip. I cry a lot, but that time because it was, how much work goes into a book. It was like, oh my gosh, like it was a nightmare. I don't want to think about it because it's going to bring my back trauma again.
Well, I'm glad you did write the book again. It was it's excellent. I hope everyone checks it out.
And this is one of my favorite book covers too. I love this book cover, and I know you read it online, but if you feel this book, Trip, it feels really nice. I've had other books, like some of them are slippery, but this is kind of like textured. It's just so nice feel to it. So I really am happy, and I love the spine too. I just love everything about it. So I'm really, really, really happy with this book. So thank you so much, Trip, for having me. I love talking with you all the time, and so it's great.
Tell everyone about your podcast, because they may not all know.
Yeah, so it's Madang, Madang. It's a Korean word for when you enter a house. So those who watch K-drama, you'll know the old homes, there's a metal gate, and when you enter it, there's a little madang. And sometimes there's a little really low-rise table. People sat out there, ate, gossiped, shared stories. Some people took naps on that. And the homes were really small, like three-room homes. So from that madang, you enter the different rooms of the house. So that's a traditional Korean home. And they are still there. A lot of them have been destroyed, but they're there. So madang is a place for Koreans to eat and chit-chat, gossip, sleep. So madang for me is a place for authors to come and share their work freely. It's like a courtyard, a little like a family room style, and it's hosted by Christian Century. So you can Google Madang Podcast, and I've had 13 episodes, and the 14th will come out February 2nd with Caitlin Curtis. And very excited, her book on Native. And, she said it was one of the best interviews. So I'm always thrilled when my guests are so happy. And Trip, you were on it too, to share your book. And it's actually one of the most listened to podcasts. I've had 13, so 14th will come out. And when I look at the stats, it's like, wow, so many people have listened to you, Trip. You are like this international figure as a podcaster, as an author, as a scholar, as a teacher, professor. So thank you for being a guest on my podcast. And when you have your next book, I'll have you back again. So, you do so many podcasts. I don't do that many. I can barely do one a month. I couldn't do January because December I got so sick. So it'll be coming out in February. And I get sponsors, and I'm so grateful for you, Trip, for sponsoring my podcast. You do so many great things. You don't just do the interviews, you hold those classes. So I get sponsors and I help advertise your work. So it's just great. working with things. I'm just being all like innovative and being this entrepreneur, which is so difficult, Trip. This is not my comfort zone.
It's not what
So
you learned in graduate school.
what was that?
Graduate school in the humanities is not where they teach you how to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So it's like you've been doing this, I think, for over a decade, and you make it seem so easy, and you do so well, and you can do them really fast. I'm not so good. I'm like the slow paced turtle, kind of moving so slowly, and it's so much work for me. It's
But
a lot of
Grace,
stress.
you know how many
too.
more books you've written, right? You've written a lot of books. I have this problem where I write the first chapter or two of a lot of things and then go, I don't want to finish. I think this is a podcast series. And then I just email all the people I was going to talk about in the book and then talk to them about it. And then I'm like, yeah. And then I say to myself, oh, I did really good. Oh, this book sold 5,000 copies. And then I'm like, and 50,000 people listen to the podcast. So then I just talk myself out of like, oh, I'll just do it as a podcast. You, on the other hand, you're just like, this is my 20th book. And
but you are a fantastic podcaster. You have 50,000 listeners.
Yeah.
Trip. Oh my gosh, that'll be my dream. I want 50,000 readers. Okay, so Trip, after this, I want 50,000 readers. I don't have 50,000 listeners.
I can't get them all to buy my own book. like
okay,
the podcast is free. You could just buy the book. You don't have to read it. Yes, that's why I tell people, I'm like, you don't have to read it. You don't have to read it. Just buy it. And if you see me,
that's exactly true. Look, I've got tons of books. I don't read all of them. Yeah, you just have to buy it. You know what? You know what it is? People think that all of us who write books make a killing. No, we don't. Unless you're like J.K. Rowling, none of us make book on the money. We spend thousands and thousands of hours trying to write this, and we don't make money. So yes, please, you don't need to read it. You just go buy it. Thank you. I like that, Trip. That's going to be my new logo. Don't read it. Just buy it.
I know it's like, how do you tip a podcast guest you really like? You listen to Homebrew. You're like, man, that conversation with Grace was so good. If I read books regularly, I would totally buy it. And then I say, look, it's okay. Most people don't read all the books they buy. Buy Invisible, put it on your shelf. And then when someone says, hey, is that good? All you have to do is repeat things Grace said on this podcast. And they're going to be like, whoa, she reads a lot of books. She reads a lot of books.
I said so much. So it feels like if you listen to this podcast that you've already read the book. So yeah, you already read the book. And so just go buy it. I love that logo, Trip. I got to use it. You don't need to read it. Just buy it.
It's a memento of this experience.
What was that?
The book is a memento to the transformative experience of hearing Grace share on the podcast.
You are hilarious, Trip. I just love talking to you. I can talk with you all day long. You are so funny. So, but I gotta use it you know what? We should tweet about it. Don't read it, just buy it.
Yeah.
Okay. Trip, you're so good on Twitter. You have so many more followers. I don't have enough followers. You just tweet after this episode. Well, don't read it, just buy it.
Yeah. The older I've gotten, and the desire to be employable has really changed how often I tweet. Now I like leave them in drafts and then decide if I'm going to hit send later. I have a couple of friends that have like big Twitter followings, and they say all the things I would say if I thought it would be helpful, but it's probably not. It's more like just venting with humor. And so sometimes I just text them. I'm like, you should tweet this. I wouldn't personally, but after I retire, I'm like,
so funny. Trip, you are so young. Trip, you're so young. I thought you were my age. Oh my gosh, you're so young. You have your whole life ahead of you. I thought you were really seriously my age, but you're so much younger than me. I'm really old, Trip, but you're so young. You'll be employable, no problem.
Later this year, I'm turning 40. I'm turning 40.
I know. So you're young. I'm in the next decade.
I'm in the next decade. And see, you were brilliant and beautiful at 9 a.m. in the morning. And you still got it. You still got it. You were on here 30 minutes after you woke up. 30 minutes.
Barely I got on. I was like running around trying to put my clothes on and my hair together. Oh my God. I actually had less because you know what? The alarm went off and I didn't want to get out of bed. So I actually had 20 minutes to get myself together. I said, oh my God, if I don't get up now, I'm never going to get ready.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to when my children leave me alone enough to have that problem. Like, I feel like that they get to a certain age that then they all want to sleep and they know how to use.
See, Trip,
clock.
I am so old that no kids are now living in my house. They're all out of the house. So it's a great time of my life, actually, that, you know what, I've had those 3 kids. You have 3 kids. I had those 3
Yes.
kids really bothering me. And so you know what, Trip, my first book came out in 2003.
Mhm.
So I graduated with my PhD 2001. In 2003, my first, or maybe it was 2002, my first book came out. So
The
2002,
Spirit Christology.
the Grace of Sophia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that came out in 2002. And then my next book didn't come out until 2011. So that is 9 years later.
Mhm.
So during that time, my kids were so young. So they were like your kids' age. I couldn't write anything. So Trip, you are right there where I was.
Well, this thing.
And then
when
so
they
from
leave home, I'll be
Huh?
like, when they leave home, I can be like, well, I have the first chapter of like 9 books, and they're just sitting there.
just put the first chapter of the 9 books all together and just make it a book. Trip,
Yeah.
That's my advice for you today.
Random
Just
thoughts.
Yeah, random thoughts. That's okay. Somehow you can just weave them together in your introduction.
The introduction. You have to use.
And then you weave them together in your conclusion.
Yeah. The
That's your book.
you have to put like interjections or something like that. Like interjections.
So that's why you are right there, Trip, where I was. Seriously. So my next book didn't come out till 2011, and then all my books came out after 2011. So you are right there where I was, like decades ago.
Well, I'm looking forward to you know, now that our youngest is like fully potty trained and all
that's
that
the
kind of
best
stuff.
thing. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Seriously, Trip, you don't know how sick, like physically I was ill all the time. After my kids were born, after Joshua, my youngest, was born, he was born 2003. For a whole year until 2004, I was sick. Literally, the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. It was such a hard time in my life. I don't want to ever go back. The kids were cute, but they were so much work. And then when he was potty trained, the last potty train, I just felt so freer. So your life is just starting now.
It's just starting. It's like somehow it's hard to write books when you're wiping butts.
Yeah, you can't. I'm telling you, from 2002 to 2011, I could not write. And I was stressed out of my mind. And looking back, I should have just said, don't write. So Trip, you don't need to write, because the sense of not writing stressed me out even more.
Oh.
So don't stress yourself out. You were right there where I was.
I like this encouragement, Grace. I think I'm gonna just start calling you when I want to hear it. Be like, Grace.
Oh yeah. And I'll send you the bill after. Okay. I could be a psychotherapist too.
I know what's that. It depends on what you're charging per hour. Well, I feel a lot better after talking to you than my therapist.
You just continue to sponsor my homebrew. Okay. That's fine.
There you go.
No, I mean, not my homebrew. I mean, my dog podcast.
Your podcast.
Like talking your language.
It happens. Yeah. Well, I've had tons of fun hanging out with you.
Oh, so much fun.
We'll definitely look forward to doing it again. Now, when is the next book, your book project with Susan?
We started it, and she's coming sometime in February to work with me physically, because we've been just doing it like, it's not easy co-writing a book. People think it's so easy, and then once you do it, it's not so easy. But with Susan, it's pretty good. I remember in my PhD program, my supervisor said he co-wrote a book with his wife. And I said, I had this romantic view. I said, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. Oh my gosh, like husband and wife co-writing a book. And he said, Grace, we're just lucky that we're not divorced. Because it's so much work, so much negotiating. So those who have never co-written, it is a lot of work. But with Susan, it's great fun. So we're writing it, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe we'll finish it by the end of the year. It's halfway done.
Mhm.
And you could have us on next year.
And what are you focusing on?
Survivor theology. It's
Mhm.
on sexual abuse.
That
Yeah.
and because she's done a lot of, in some of her work is on like research of survivors within religious communities and such.
Yeah. So she's a gender studies
Mhm.
professor. One of her textbooks is like a bestseller. It's amazing that she can sell her books like thousands and thousands of copies. So she is a big name, but her actually degree is in theology, but she's
Yeah.
in gender studies. So she loves working with me because she wants to do theology too, because that's her training. But she hasn't been able to because she does so much gender studies.
Mhm.
So we love working together. She's a great friend.
Oh
So
yeah.
I look forward to seeing her. Yeah. So you can have us on when the book's done. We're hoping to get it done this year, but that's always a hope. We don't know. Anything can
Well,
happen.
Well, once it's done, let me know. I want to beat the other podcast to the punch.
Oh yeah, you are my number one
Now,
podcast go-to.
I mean, I'm, how like Oprah doesn't do the interview with someone if they've already talked about whatever it is on like 5 places.
Yeah.
I tell myself that that's what I have in common with Oprah. When people, I see them on 5 podcasts and they email me like, I'd like to be on your podcast. I'm like, wait a year. Because I don't want, like, I just heard you on a bunch of them. I wouldn't have listened to it if I was going to talk to you because I don't know what you're going to say. And, and I'd rather just share the other ones if I liked them. But so they have to be my friend if I'm going to have them on after I've already heard them.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on. And thank you again for everything that you do. It's great. Thank you for all your sponsorship of Madang. And I hope your listeners will come and listen to Madang and your episode too, Divine Investment. Yeah, they should go and listen to your episode. It might have been episode 9 or 10, but
I'll put a link to it in the blog post for this episode.
Yeah,
so
they should listen to yours before anyone else's. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. And then buy the book.
Heard me say anything. They've never
buy the book.
That is true. They should buy.
Don't read it.
They don't have to read it. You can buy multiple copies, and if you don't even want to take up space on your shelf, you can buy a Kindle copy.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Say to yourself, when I retire, it's going to be there. And if you want, you can just text me out. I can tell you like the 30 pages that are the most important to read.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you, Trip.
It's been a blast.
Oh, such a blast. Thank you so much, Trip.
All right.